Welcome again, everybody. Once again, thank you to the cooks. We're really grateful. We collected $404, which is going to be donated to our Guatemalan mission partners. So thank you all. And as by way of introduction for Pastor Erik, I had the pleasure to work on the call committee. And one of the criteria we had when we were looking at candidates was, we've just had a lot of turnover, and we've had a lot of movement. We were looking for someone who could be steady, consistent, wear well, and Pastor Erik fits all those things, and we have appreciated that. So I'm not going to, embellish anything further about his sister. I'll let him tell you, and not any further.
Thank you. It's great to see all of you here today in the same room, and lots of familiar faces. I'm getting to know a lot of you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And those are, thanks TY, because those are qualities that I most appreciate in people, and so to hear that referred to toward me, it means a lot, so thank you. So I have notes so that I don't just start rambling. And I was kind of joking with these guys. First off, I hope that nobody's here expecting some exciting faith journey story, because I'm sorry I don't have that. But that is kind of what, as I thought about what I would say about a faith journey, I realized that is an interesting part of my faith journey, is how established, I guess, I always have been in the church growing up as a pastor's kid. Actually, I figured out throughout the call process, I was thinking back and realized I'm the fourth generation of Lutheran preachers in the United States. So that's kind of, that says something about what my faith journey is. Started with my great grandpa, who was a lay preacher. He came to Augsburg College from out in North Dakota and was trained to be a lay preacher, and then went back and helped lead services back in North Dakota where they were homesteading. But don't worry, I'm not starting way back there and working up to here. I grew up in the church. Grew up at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Aberdeen, South Dakota. I know there's some Aberdeen people who others who have Aberdeen connections, and that's a huge part of my faith journey. I think of those folks often. I've had the opportunity to visit. My dad being a pastor, moved shortly after my brother and I graduated high school in Aberdeen, but I've been able to go back a few times. I've brought youth groups back because another huge part of my faith journey was Klein Ranch Bible Camp in western South Dakota, and I've taken groups of kids there from a former congregation I served, and we would go, and part of the trip was to spend a night sleeping on the floor at Bethlehem, and I thought that was a great treat personally. I think of those folks often, and I really the source of my call to ministry begins very much with Bethlehem and Aberdeen and Klein Ranch Bible Camp. My dad is a pastor, and I grew up very much in the church. From my earliest memories, there are ladies who talk about how I used to come into the coffee fellowship hour and I couldn't even really see above the table, and I'd grab cookies off the table and run away. So also very resourceful from the very beginning. But a part of a pastor's call is to not that pastors are more able to live an exemplary life, but part of our agreement in the call process is that we are called to also be an example to our congregations. And so having a dad as a pastor, I really internalized that, and I felt like I was supporting my dad by being a good kid and trying to, be a faithful Christian. And so I grew up in the church, supporting my dad, being at Vacation Bible School, Sunday school. I loved church, and so I loved to do all that stuff. And going to Bible camp from the very beginning of elementary school. I should probably refer to my notes. I was an acolyte, and whenever an acolyte didn't show up, my dad would be like, could you help us out? So I acolyted a lot. And then I was very involved in the youth group. I became a leader of the youth group. I served on church council in my home congregation. So that was, my faith journey was very much rooted in the church. And I'm very happy to say that and proud that was an opportunity that, came from my family. And then after I graduated high school, I went to Concordia College in Moorhead. Same thing, a big theme here of Lutheran Christian lifestyle here. And during that time, I worked 2 summers. So I grew up at Bible camp. And that was, for me, that was a huge part of my faith journey. I mentioned Bethlehem. I knew that the people loved me there, and that was really important to me. I still, when I think back, that's what I really think about, is I knew that people cared about me and loved me, and that the faith, they were doing that because of their faith, that they were nurturing the kids in the congregation because that's what they felt a big part of their calling was. And going to Bible camp was very big because I knew that people liked me when I would go to camp. A big thing about outdoor ministry is that it's community building. So you go for a week into a wilderness setting, and there's sometimes challenges built in so that you can, as a group, persevere. Kids can, form a community, be welcomed and accepted, and you sing songs, you worship together, you eat all your meals together, you sleep in bunkhouses and all this. And that was really helpful for me too, because it was another Christian environment where people cared about me. And I would go back to the same camps, and the staff remembered me and knew my name, and that was all really, really influential for me growing up. So then when I was at college, it had been a dream to work at camp. And I was always told that you had to finish 1 year of college before you could work at camp. So I took my opportunity and I went to Klein Ranch, which had become my favorite camp, and worked there for my first summer after my first year of college. And then went back. Well, I guess this is the part of the faith journey too, where I tell you, I went to college thinking that I was pre-optometry and that I was I wanted to be an eye doctor, because I figured, the eye is only so big, how hard could it be? Turns out it's pretty complicated. And I had a bit of a sort of a faith crisis, life direction crisis my freshman year. Realized I don't like biology class, but I loved my religion class. I loved my English classes, and so I finally, in hindsight, I had often felt called to ministry, but that was the point in my life where I you have to determine where are you going, and that was during my freshman year when I realized, all right, fine, I'll do it. I'll become a pastor, because God had been preparing me for that and nudging me in that direction and putting people in my life that would inspire that in me. And so in hindsight, God was working that out the whole time. I was the last one to realize it. And then that was when I went to camp and spent that whole summer learning how to lead groups and, have a pastoral presence. But then, this is the point where I met my wife. So Yeah, I guess what I was going to say is that my faith journey is twofold. I'm telling you the practical part right now. Just the part that the public, practical part of my faith journey, very established church. There's a second part that's more of the personal experience. And this is where, when I was at Concordia, when I met my wife, when the personal part of your faith journey, that we all kind of have an internal growing in faith, relationship with God, doubts, growth, and part of it for me was I knew I was going to be a pastor at this point, and I met my wife, and we started to meet each other's families. And I grew up in a kind of a pietistic Scandinavian Lutheran family. And, like I mentioned, I thought that having an exemplary sort of lifestyle of Christian life and living out your faith publicly. But then I met my wife's family, she's also a pastor's kid. So you're thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, her dad is known as the irreverent reverend. And her dad and her uncle are very well-known, well-respected Lutheran pastors, and her uncle was a professor, church history, Luther scholar, and very well-known in the same Lutheran part of the Lutheran church that I grew up in. And yet they were very irreverent, and they didn't care about piety. They had no piety whatsoever. And they would be proud to be the first ones to tell you that. And so I was very confused. This was not the kind of, pastors that I was used to. And it kind of threw me for a while. And meanwhile, I was studying Lutheran theology at Concordia. And TY, this just went black. Is that... It's okay? All right. So this is the internal part where I started to think, how can these guys, they're pastors and leaders and well-respected, and yet, they're very different from what I'm used to. And so that led me to really embody and learn more, internalize the difference between something that I want to talk about central to my faith journey, theology of glory versus theology of the cross. Does that sound familiar to people? If you grew up in the Lutheran church and went to confirmation, you might have learned about that. And I think the best way of describing it is theology of glory is kind of do good to get good in your relationship with God, or to think, to be concerned with your sort of piety as if that had any bearing on your relationship with God, where Martin Luther, the Reformers, and more confessional Lutheranism emphasizes theology of the cross, which is the opposite of theology of glory, and it begins at the foot of the cross of Christ, where everything about your relationship with God is a gift from God on account of Jesus Christ, where piety doesn't really it doesn't play into it. Another good way of associating, as Christians, we know we don't believe in karma. It's not part of our faith. Well, theology of glory is somewhat similar to karma in its sort of way of thinking, and we know that we are forgiven and free on account of Jesus Christ and Christ crucified. And that's the theology of the cross. Everything begins there. Your relationship with God is rooted in what Christ did for you on the cross. And then your life and your faith come after that as a gift. Everything about your life is a gift. You can actually just hear this as a proclamation. Your life and relationship with God does begin at the cross. And the unfolding of your life is a gift through God's Spirit working in you to give you faith, to gather you here for man up breakfast to be part of Easter Lutheran Church. That's all a gift from God that we are blessed with. It's not necessarily that and even to the point where, I think so highly of Bethlehem and Aberdeen. That was a gift. And I told you that in hindsight, I could see that God was working through that ministry and those people and that, experience of my life to call me into the ministry. And it was never my doing. God was gifting me and blessing me through those experiences and those people. And that was what I thankfully realized when I met the irreverent reverends, my father-in-law and his brother, and that had a huge impact on my growth. And it was true before I knew it was true, but I finally came to understand it more. And that was through higher education, and then so that was Concordia, and then I went to Luther Seminary. And continued on with the practical part of my faith journey too, which led me to a first call in Wisconsin, 2 small rural congregations, 100 years old. It was that was my first call experience, and then I've been in Bloomington for 17 years at a congregation there, and now I'm here, and very excited and happy to be here, and I bring with all that other experience as well. But internally, I've gone through a lot of faith journey in the last few years, and this is the last part of my story. So if you're still with me, I don't see anybody sleeping, but if you're still with me, so I've been describing the twofold part of my faith journey: the practical, just growing up in the church, and college and seminary. The internal, learning more about sort of the truth of Scripture and the Lutheran confessions, and theology of glory versus theology of the cross, and the last part, kind of in 2017, I was able to go on a sabbatical. This is after, so I'd been at my last congregation for like 10 or 12 years, and was able, a little more confirmation lesson here. If you remember, in 1517, in the year 1517, Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, Germany, sparking the Protestant Reformation. And if you think about, I can even do this math, 1517 to 2017 is 500-year anniversary. And my wife and I came across a tour to Germany where we could be in Wittenberg on October 31st, 2017, on the actual 500th anniversary. So if you think about my family, generations of Lutheran Christians, and many pastors on both sides of our family, and the thought of being able to be where it all began 500 years later was something we couldn't pass up. And it felt like a dream of many generations of our families to be able to do that. So I told the congregation, we're going to do this trip. I would love if it could be a sabbatical, but I'll do it as vacation, because we're definitely going to do this. And they said, absolutely, go. So I got to go on a several-month sabbatical, which included a lot of other experiences in a project, which I could tell you about some other time. But we got to go and tour Germany and the Martin Luther sites. And we were in Wittenberg. We were in the actual Castle Church where he nailed the 95 Theses for the special celebration worship, where the Valparaiso choir sang "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," led all of us in the hymn, Luther's famous hymn. So it was just awesome. That was cool. At the same time, one of the things that happened was we were able to join my wife's uncle and his wife. He's the Luther scholar who gave us a tour of Martin Luther's house while we were there. So sort of grew in relationship with him and his wife at that time, and came back, and he was celebrating a milestone in his ministry where a group of younger Lutherans had started a publishing and media ministry in the United States called 1517.org. And this is kind of an advertisement. I'm just I don't benefit, but it's changed my life. It's been a huge part of my faith journey. It's not 1517 Media, which is what Augsburg changed their publication company to. It's 1517.org. It's different. But they produced a book called a Festschrift. I had never heard of this before. It's a tradition. I think that's German, but it's a tradition of publishing articles and journals and writings in honor of a beloved professor, a mentor. And so a bunch of people who had learned from my wife's uncle put this book together, and I got a hold of it as a gift from my wife after we had been in Germany with them. And that's when I learned about 1517.org, because they published it there, and I was wondering who would do this for him. So then I was researching. I found out that they do an annual conference in San Diego every October in ongoing celebration of the anniversary of the start of the Reformation. So I went. So that was also huge. And when I went to that conference, a theological conference, I met more of those guys. I learned, this was in 2019, so I had never listened to podcasts before. And I mean, they were still relatively new. I wasn't that behind the times, but I discovered the 1517 network of podcasts. And so I started just listening constantly to all kinds. Some of my favorites, Thinking Fellows, You Are Forgiven, 40 minutes in the Old Testament, 30 minutes in the New Testament, Outlaw God, Faith and Reason Exchange. I learned about Christian apologetics, which I had never really learned about before. And that's basically the explanation and defense of the faith. And we didn't learn that. At least I didn't get the classes at college or seminary. But I've learned it through this network. And it just has brought my faith into bloom. I've learned just so much about biblical Christianity and more about Lutheran confessions, and it's just really inspired and informed my faith more. And that's all been in the last five years. It's just been really very fruitful in my faith journey, and I tell people it's really changed my life, because I went from being, a traditional Christian, Lutheran Christian, to really having a personal faith and personal trust, even more deeply than just knowledge. I went from knowledge to really a deeper sense of faith. And that's the way we believe that it happens, through hearing other Christians, hearing other pastors preach, other Christians teach the scripture. And that's what 1517 has meant for me for the last several years. So I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So are you an irreverent reverend?
I'm working on it. I'm learning how to be a more irreverent reverend.
I'm not asking you to be, I'm just curious.
Yeah. They've taught me well. I've learned a lot. Yeah.
Tug and pull from your dad to your in-laws?
He's come around too.
Is he?
Yeah. He spends a lot of time with them, which is also really cool to be able to have two families that have such similar background and values and beliefs that they were like best friends immediately. And they have so many shared friends as pastors in a small Lutheran world. So yeah, so my dad has enjoyed spending time with them too. And my wife's uncle passed away last year, so it's been, my parents were actually at my in-laws' house when my in-laws learned that he had died, and it just happened that they were visiting them that day, which I believe is a God thing. So, T.Y., did you have a
question? Biggest surprise coming observations in Eastman relative to where you came.
Okay.
And two, given your time and talent, how do you see yourself contributing in the future? Where, based on what you've seen, how do you see yourself fitting in and bringing forward?
Here, yeah. Well, there's been a lot of surprises having been a pastor in one place for almost 17 years, but ironically, the first thing that comes to my mind is the biggest surprise worth mentioning here is the similarity that I loved where I was. I loved the congregation, the people, and it was really hard to leave. I felt it was a God thing, and that's why I'm here. But I feel so blessed that I went from a church that I loved to another congregation that has a very similar culture and spirit, and actually timeline. Both churches exactly the same age. That my former congregation was about a year older, so we had our 50th celebration while I was there, and we're looking at doing celebrating our 50th here this coming year. So very similar, mission start congregation. And then just the spirit, the people, I just immediately have felt at home and connected here, just like there hasn't been a change. It's just that I drive to a different building. So that's been awesome. And my contribution to the future here?
Yeah, just given the talents you have, you understand your strengths.
Yeah.
What do you see yourself doing in the future to
Yeah.
bring it forward?
Well, so that's why I wanted to mention the 15-17. I'm hoping that somebody here thinks, maybe the Spirit moves them to say, what were those podcasts again? Because I'd love to help anybody find them and listen to that really helpful source. But it's not about that organization as it is that they proclaim the gospel in a way that really inspired my faith, and I've learned how to even more effectively proclaim the gospel. I grew up, I had a lot of experience. I went to seminary education and everything, and I've been a pastor for over 20 years. But it clicked in a new way for me where I really internalized the preaching the gospel. So I believe that that's part of the reason, or one of my biggest gifts that I'm here is to really proclaim the gospel. Hand over the goods is how it's sometimes referred to. That's what brings congregations and Christians to life. So that, but also as you mentioned, I think my gifts for just, I know who I am. I know, I just try to be consistent, and I have a consistent leadership. Like I said, my faith journey might be kind of boring, but I think it's deep and it's rich because of the Holy Spirit, and so I bring that sort of consistency, and you know what you get, and yeah.
What about your kids? Is it one more generation of pastors coming up?
No, I don't think so.
It's going to be an optometrist, isn't it?
Yes, finally an optometrist. No, my oldest son is planning to apply to the nursing program at Gustavus, and our youngest son is very interested in history. We don't know for sure what he wants to do yet, because you got to go to your freshman year first, right, and have a God moment. but I don't think he's considering ministry. So, not in our family, but I know that they will live out their faith in whatever they do.
So with your kids, then, did that have a big influence, your upbringing? You were the son of a pastor, and now you're parenting, so you know your kids are looking at you like you look at your dad? Is that a big influence on how you parented them?
Well, I must not have gotten it right because they're not pastors. No, I don't. I think, from observations, pastors' kids, some of the time become pastors, and some of the time say, "There's no way I would ever do that," and that's very common. And my kids are like, "No, I'm not gonna do. I wouldn't do that." So.
I just mean, like,
Yeah.
you know how you viewed your dad as you were growing up.
Yeah.
And, that gives you insight on either avoiding mistakes, but it also
Yeah.
goes around and around your head, like, well, I still have to parent, well, I don't want them to be mad at me for this.
Right. I definitely heard myself saying a lot of things that my dad said to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So that definitely influenced the way that I parented. Yeah. And I'm thankful. I pretty much grew up my entire childhood at one church and graduated from high school in Aberdeen from second grade all the way through. And my boys, I'm very thankful for a pastor's family who often move a lot, that they have lived in the same house their entire life. They went to the Bloomington schools all the way through and had the same church for their entire childhood. So it feels like a real big blessing to me, and I'm very thankful for that. Besides that, my parents live in Bloomington, which none of us planned that, but it's been a huge blessing to have my parents a couple miles away from us, and my boys have been able to spend a lot of time with their grandparents over the years. And so I still don't see anybody sleeping. I'm very glad for that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.